12 Years a Slave was released in 2013 and was directed by Steve McQueen and stars Chiwetel Ejiofor, Michael Fassbender, Benedict Cumberbatch, and Lupita Nyong'o. And it follows the true story of Solomon Northup, a free black man from upstate New York who was abducted and sold into slavery, which in turn is based upon Northup's own published account of his enslavement. I've been wanting to do a review in honor of Black History Month for quite some time now, and I had a wealth of content to choose from, and honestly had a hard time deciding on what to eventually go with. 12 Years a Slave was not my original choice, but it's a film that is always not too far from my mind. It's a movie I love and respect, and is a shining example of how to tackle its subject matter. 12 Years a Slave is not only one of the best films I have ever seen, but I believe it to be one of the most important films ever made as well. It showcases how the medium of film can be used to do some right in a world that's so cold, dark, and cruel. The film doesn't shy away from the darkness of its subject matter and gives us a 2-hour glance into a world that has forever scarred the history of the world. Yet in that, I think director Steve McQueen has crafted a film that is informative, respectful, uplifting, and ugly, and will stand the test of time as one of the greatest works, if not the greatest visual work about slavery that has ever been made. 12 Years a Slave is a film I remember well. I remember when I first saw the trailer and I instantly knew that's a film I need to see. I wanted to see it so bad I had my parents drive me out to some small theater in the middle of nowhere, which was the only theater around at the time playing it. And what I witnessed was an experience and film that has stuck with me ever since. That was almost 10 years ago. I was 17 then, and still, this is a film I will never forget, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to finally talk about this movie. This isn't just a film that documents the true horrors of slavery. It does do that, but it also showcases the importance of life and stands as a reminder of those who were lost because of this great evil, as well as those who have lived. The film is not a pretty depiction. It shows the horror of the events the best it can. In some ways, I'm sure it could have gone even farther. But still, I think this film does a phenomenal job of showing the events of this fascinating historical figure, the truth of slavery, and leaves us with hope. So before we get into my actual thoughts on this amazing film, let's do what we always do here and go behind the scenes to see just how this film was made. Talks about 12 Years a Slave started back in 2008 at a screening for Steve McQueen's film Hunger, where he had a meeting with screenwriter John Ridley about making a film about the slave era in America. It wasn't until the discovery of the 1853 memoir 12 Years a Slave that the two had a story to tell that they could both get behind. In an interview, McQueen stated that the book read like the diary of Anne Frank and gave a true first-hand account of the acts of slavery. After a lengthy development cycle, Brad Pitt's production company Plan B Entertainment backed the film, which helped the movie get funding from several other studios. The film was officially announced in 2011 with Chiwetel Ejiofor slated to play Solomon Northup. McQueen chose him because he believed he held a class and dignity like Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte. To help with the language and dialect of the era and regions the film takes place in, Michael Buster, a dialect coach, was hired to assist the cast in altering their speech. The film would end up having a style of writing similar to that of the historical period, with great influence from the King James Bible as well. Also, I found it interesting that apparently there was a feud between McQueen and screenwriter John Ridley over shared credit of the screenplay. Steve McQueen apparently helped with the script, but if you look at the credits, John Ridley is the sole writer for the film. Neither would thank the other during their acceptance speeches during the Oscars, but interviews have come out since that state there was no feud and that the sole screenplay credit was due to the rules of the Writers Guild of America. The film started principal photography in New Orleans on June 27, 2012. Shooting ran for 7 weeks and concluded on August 13th of 2012. To keep production costs low, the filming mostly took place around the greater New Orleans area, close to where the real Solomon Northup was enslaved. The movie was also filmed on 4 separate historic plantations. Sean Bobbitt served as the film's cinematographer and shot the movie on 35mm film, believing that shooting a period piece on film gives audiences a sense for the period and quality, and he wanted to provide the film with an epic quality because the film itself was an epic tale of human endurance. As for the music, the film was composed by Hans Zimmer, with on-screen violin music written and arranged by Nicholas Brittle and performed by Tim Fain. The film also used several Western classical pieces and American folk music throughout the film that were appropriate for the time period the movie takes place. When the film was finally released, it started out in limited quantity, before getting a much wider one, and ended up earning $187.7 million on a budget of $22 million. On top of that, the film also received universal acclaim and had its content compared to the likes of Schindler's List and Passion of the Christ. The film was praised for its horrific depiction of slavery as well as the performances. The buzz for the film led to it being a top contender for Best Picture, and at that year's Academy Awards, the film received numerous nominations and came away with 3 awards, which included Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Supporting Actress for Lupita Nyong'o, and finally, Best Picture. So with that out of the way, let's get into my actual thoughts on this very important film. 12 Years a Slave is a masterpiece and very much deserving of its Best Picture win. It's one of the best films I've ever seen and a film that I've never been able to forget about. I'm sure if you really got down to it, someone could find some flaw, some chink in the armor that doesn't work about the movie. Someone could say the film might not go far enough with its depiction of historical events. But as for a large-scale Hollywood film, I think the film does a more than admirable job. Everyone that knows me knows I'm a historical nut. I love a good historical film, and growing up in the U.S., slavery is a subject that is always at the back of anyone's mind. It follows us like our own shadow, and I'm glad to have a film that's able to capture those horrors we've read about in history class. I think the historical authenticity and attention to detail in the film is phenomenal. It feels like we have been transformed into the antebellum South, and having us follow Solomon Northup allows us to see slavery from his point of view, and it ends up truly feeling like a living nightmare, especially in the film's first act when Solomon is drugged and then finds himself waking up on the floor of a room in chains where he is then beaten and placed on a boat heading to the south. McQueen does such a great job of leaving the audience as disoriented as our main character, although the audience is already aware of what's happening. Having Solomon come to his own realization is literally horrifying to watch, and the rest of the film ends up feeling like this nightmare he has, as well as the audience, that just, we can't escape it. I can't praise this film's first act enough. From the brilliant cold opening of seeing our main character in slavery to the cutback of his life prior to the events of this tragedy. We go through his daily routine before we're faced with the harsh reality of what happened to him. It wastes no time and actually spends less time in the before enslavement scenes than I would have thought when I first watched this film. I'm somebody that loves having a ton of context for his films, but in this instance, I think the film does a great job of giving us just a glimpse of his normal life before stripping that away from us for the rest of the movie. What follows is truly a heart of darkness type situation where despite all the horrible things happening to him and those around him, Solomon tries to remain hopeful that justice will find its way in the end, and to slowly watch him through the course of the movie continue to have a belief in that is really inspiring until eventually he succumbs to the idea that he may never be free and might never see his wife and children again. And in that instant, Chiwetel Ejiofor truly shines and gives some of the best bit of acting I've ever seen. You literally see the hope leave his eyes as he accepts his situation and decides to live his life as a slave. It's truly one of the most heartbreaking scenes I've ever seen. The film is honestly made up of horrific moment after horrific moment, but none gets under my skin more than the dreaded long take in this film. Steve McQueen uses a lot of long takes throughout the duration of the film to show passages of time or to slowly see the emotions of a character change, such as Solomon's loss of hope, which I just mentioned. But the long take for me is most effective in the scene where Solomon, now going by the name Platt, ends up attacking one of the plantation wardens, played by Paul Dano, and he is punished by being hung from a tree, but he's held up just enough to where if he just stands on his tippy toes, he won't be hung. This shot lasts for a little over a minute, but I swear every time I watch it, it just gets longer and longer until the tension is finally broken and the rope is cut. I also admire the film's script for showing us three very different depictions of slave owners in the South. Throughout the film, Platt comes under the ownership of three slave owners. William Ford, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, Michael Fassbender as Edwin Epps, and Brian Batt as Judge Turner. We see through all three of them how they view slavery, and each one truly sees it all so differently. Ford seems somewhat kind and gentle to his slaves. He preaches to them on Sunday and rewards those who make an impression on him with benefits. But at the end of the day, despite what he sees as good intentions, he is still a slave owner. Let's jump to Judge Turner, who is definitely the most interesting. We honestly don't see much of him in the movie, but he seems to look at his slaves differently. We especially see this when we are introduced to Mistress Shaw, played by Alfre Woodard, who we see lives a more simple life in the mansion of her owner. Then we have Edwin Epps, who truly is the scum of the earth and the worst of the three when it comes to his views and sadistic tendencies for violence. Michael Fassbender plays this character wonderfully and is definitely a standout. He truly transforms into this role, even having a certain beard oil on him to make his breath smell like whiskey. But, of course, the film wouldn't work without Chiwetel Ejiofor's commanding performance. This is not only a great character, but an interesting historical figure as well. This man was a free man. He lived with his family in New York, and one day all of that was stripped from him for 12 whole years. And Ejiofor does a fantastic job of showing how this literally drains his character. We also see the problems that arise when his owners begin to discover he is well-read and knows things that they believe most slaves shouldn't know, which makes him dangerous to them and puts a target on his back. I've already talked about how he changes from more optimistic to eventually losing all hope as plan after plan fails. He's betrayed at one point by someone he thinks can send a letter up north to secure his freedom, and it really does break you. However, in the end, the one that outshines everyone in the film is Lupita Nyong'o, and I knew as soon as I saw this film, we had a star on our hands. Lupita Nyong'o gives one of the best performances I've seen by an actress, and deservingly so won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. We literally watch this woman who, like Solomon, is trying to survive by doing the best she can. She picks the most cotton, more than any man or woman on the plantation, and yet she is only rewarded with nightly visits from Epps, who rapes her. My favorite scene of hers is when she is accosted for visiting one of the other plantations to get soap, wanting desperately to be clean. This performance is great, but Lupita Nyong'o showed she truly was one to watch for. Now we come to the end of the film, which is both bittersweet as much as it is triumphant. The film does such a great job when it comes to time. We never know exactly just how much time has passed in the film, and when Solomon has finally lost all hope, Brad Pitt shows up to save the day and writes a letter to secure his freedom. That moment when Solomon is finally taken away by horse cart from the plantation and the camera holds on his face is one of the saddest and most uplifting moments. We see life enter into him again, and we see the wear and tear in his eyes, a person haunted by his experience. And the final moments of him seeing his family for the first time in 12 years and seeing his grandson, who has the same name as him, shows that even though he was gone for so long a time, he was never forgotten. There's a few other things I wanted to briefly mention before we finish up here. First off, I want to praise the cinematography. This is a great and beautiful looking film, and the use of those long takes really allows the film to stand out among the crowd. I also have to mention the soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, which honestly reminds me a lot of his track time from Inception, but provides us with both horror as well as hope that justice might be done. As for any problems the film might have, although I think this is a perfect film, if I had to nitpick one thing, it would be the inclusion of Brad Pitt in the film. He was a producer on the movie, but his inclusion, I don't end up seeing the character like I do with everyone else, and I just end up seeing Brad Pitt. But that's just so small a thing in a film that, for me, just does everything right. 12 Years a Slave is a powerful film, and I think one of the most important movies to come out in the past 20 years. It showcases the real horrors of slavery while also celebrating and remembering the lives the horrible ill took. Sadly, I feel like it's not talked about as much as it should be, because I think it belongs and should be discussed among other important films, such as Schindler's List. It's a masterpiece that has truly stuck with me, and I think it deserves to be remembered and placed up there as one of the most important films ever made. But, with all that said, I'm gonna give 12 Years a Slave a 9 out of 10. Well guys, I want to thank you for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have not seen this Best Picture winner, I highly recommend you check it out. It truly is worth your time, and it is the best film ever made that touches on the subject of slavery. Anyway, that's all I've got for you, so as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.